Um, yeah, so second part of this, let's see, what was I thinking about? Well, one thing I would like to change would be in our specific game here, Catherine, you can get items. Uh, and, oh, I guess I never really tested that these floor pointers work. I just assumed that they had. But one thing that we can do is we can just freeze these to 3 and wait a little bit of time, and it should be every 10 seconds. You can actually see, oh, okay, that fell. But it might increment when the stage falls, so it might be okay the next time. You can tell on the left side of the screen that the blocks fall out when it every 10 seconds or so, and yeah, it looks like the stage has stopped falling, which is good because that means that it will be easier to start to debug stuff on our end. So one of the things that we want to test out is, oh, I have a cheat engine processes open over here. I don't know what that one is. Close that. Oh, that was probably the memory viewer. Um, Let me stop the debugger. Um, I'm trying to think. We have items. One of those items is this thing called X Factor, and it lets you climb 2 steps instead of one. So maybe the way that it works is where it triggers for some amount of time. It takes like 15 seconds or so. So maybe something that we would like to change would be maybe we want to change that. Since we're playing a competitive game, 15 seconds is a bit long for a climb 2 power, so maybe we want to shorten it. So how would we go about finding what sets that value? Well, um, I would think that because we found the player 2 object, we're actually in a pretty good spot because uh, we can probably theoretically think about this where okay, probably what item player 2 has is a property of the player 2 object. So if we look in memory at the player 2 object, we should be able to find out what that item is. Um, Maybe the when you use X Factor, we'll see things decrement, right? And that will be the timer. Um, so we can look for a couple things. We could maybe just set the player 2 property to a climb height, but probably what we will end up doing and what would be really cool would be changing the actual instructions because up till now we've changed values, right? We've changed properties of things, or rather we've found these properties, and sometimes we've frozen them. Um, but what we want to do next is we actually want to change how the game behaves, so that instead of making something last for 15 seconds, maybe we want to make it last for 8 seconds. Um, so that will require us to actually modify the assembly instructions. So the way that we'll approach that will be okay, we'll find what section of memory gets activated when you use the X factor, when you use the drink. So, first thing I guess we got to do is maybe what we'll start with is we'll just browse the character memory, and you can see that when player 2 isn't moving, there's not much that moves. There's some stuff, which might be related to state, might be related to different animations that play because of a certain state. Not sure. But when a player moves, stuff happens. You can see that a whole bunch, red indicates that something has changed. Uh, and when you only move left and right, you can see, oh yeah, only a few things change. But when you go up and down, it looks like there's a lot more that gets affected. But Catherine, it works better when to farm when, excuse me, one player is ahead of the other. So we'll just put player 1 is going to be a little bit ahead of player 2, which will allow player 2 to have better odds at farming for an item. And sure enough, we got an X Factor spawned in. So what I'm going to look at now is I'm literally about to pick up the X Factor, but my eyes are looking at the memory viewer. And I'm going to look for what changes when I grab this X Factor. Now here's the other bit though, is that I knew that when I go higher on the tower that a lot of values change. So in order to minimize that, I'm actually going to pull out one more block. That way, when I grab this, uh, not as few stuff has changed as possible. So if I grab, I can see a couple different things changed. Uh, there is my juice. Um, and then when I use it, I can see that a couple other things have changed. Most notably, I think that this value has gone from a 5 to a 0. So I am going to add this address to the list, and I'm going to assume that this is um, P2 item. Again, apologies if the Catherine game is cutting that off. I've been trying to keep things pretty okay. But yeah, this is the player 2 item. So I can change this to maybe a 5 again. And the idea of this is that, okay, I don't want to have to farm for things. I just want to give myself X factor. Um, so this is like prep work in order to begin, right? So okay, I changed that to 5. I don't see anything different on the screen. Maybe the part of memory, right? Like when you walk over an item, maybe there's a process or a bit of code that runs that generates the GUI display that you have an item. But maybe this means that we have an active item. So if I use X, the use item button, sure enough, that triggers. This is where too, if you really wanted to, if you find your own items and you find that, oh yeah, really they're just numbers in the system, you could just change those to things, right? So 5 was X factor. 1, if I tap the item button, 1 is the white block. Okay, and this is where you could do really cool stuff because you might find items that were left into the game that weren't finished. Right, so there was, a dark block, and 3, I know from just past experience with Catherine, that 3 is actually an unfinished item that freezes time. Um, if I use this, you can see that the player 1 actually has his animation is completely frozen, um, which is pretty cool. It also lets you do something really slick, where this is just me having a little bit of fun, where I use this, time freezes, and then if I hit him, he explodes. So that's cool. But not exactly what we wanted. We wanted to get back to the game and actually modify the X Factor timing. But now we have free control over our player 2 items, which should make things much, much easier for us to deal with. So we just refreshed it, and I refroze our pointers, so time should, that should give us plenty of time to do stuff. I'm just getting him a little bit ahead, but I didn't need to do that because now I have control over the player 2 item. I'm not bothering with actually getting the pointer for this because I'm just referencing this for like right now. I'm not, I don't need I don't need to, pretty much. Just for the purposes of what's going on. Because, since I have the player 2 object pointer, I should be able to get to the player 2 item relatively quickly. And I'm more interested in the effects of X Factor than giving it itself. So I'm going to give myself 5. And let's see, I'm looking on here, and one of the things that I'm thinking about is that, okay, what happens to the player when they drink X? So I'm looking at the memory viewer, and when I use this, what happens? I see a couple things changed. This value that I highlight right now looked pretty interesting because it changed from a 1 to a 2. And so I'm going to look, and when the X factor runs out, does it reduce back to 1? Because in my mind, and it did, and you also saw some other stuff that triggered as well. But I know that the way that X Factor works is where normally you can climb 1 block, and then after X Factor you can climb 2 blocks. So it's very likely that this value is actually just how high a player can climb. Um, so I will add this address to the list, and I'll test that out. I'm not going to give it a name because I don't really care about this, and I'll change it to 2, and it instantly reset, um, which is a problem. I'm assuming that this is updating every frame, so I'm going to pause the game. I'm going to update this to 2, and now it is not changing. And now I'm going to try to freeze this value because I think this should be reasonable. It did change back, which is kind of interesting because it shouldn't. That means that there's like it went back to 2. So it looks like the thing that controls this value is a little bit complicated, I guess. But let's see. Oh, I can climb 2. I can. So I guess just changing that value is enough and freezing it initially to 2. So that's cool. But I can unfreeze that because I don't really care for this. What I actually care for, though, is what writes to this address. Right? I can see, oh yeah, every frame it's updating. So this is probably saying that, oh yeah, normally, right, I just move, like, the normal player state is that they can only climb one block. And it looks like that is being set every frame, which is kind of interesting that the way that they write it is where it's a constant. That means that like what's going to happen from a code perspective is that it says, okay, if player state is normal, they can only climb one. Set climb height to 1. As opposed to the way that you might think about it would be, oh, well, okay, normally only set it when a state has changed. But that's not quite what's happening here. But what we're interested in is that when I give P2 item a 5, which is our X factor, which is our drink, what happens, what writes to this instruction? Because what that means is that that's going to be the instruction that sets the X factor. So I use X factor. I can see that it's been called once when we initially use it, right? And it says, okay, move 2 to this location, which EDI and ESI, we're pretty sure that that's the player 2 object. Yep. So we know that this is just moving 2 to there. So next we want to look at the disassembler, which we already had open, but this just moves us, this top part, to the code. If you know assembly, that's great. If you don't, oh well. You actually don't need to know too much. You just, you're thinking through this in your head. You're like, okay, well, jump is just move to this location. Call is, do a function. A procedure is what that's called. And actually, Cheat Engine, I didn't even know this, but it actually gives you a little bit of description on what the opcode is down bottom, right? I mean, copy, memory, you got jump, right? So that's pretty cool stuff. But anyway, for our purposes, we know that, hey, we moved a constant into this player object, right, into this memory location. And now we know right after this, I knew the game, so I knew it was roughly 15 seconds or so. But it's kind of neat that, hey, the comment is translating that this is coming out to 15. And what this means for us is that, and what logically kind of makes sense if we think about it, is that it's saying, hey, yeah, this player can climb 2 for the next 15 seconds. That's our theory on how this is going to work. So this is actually saying at the next byte, move that value to there, which is pretty cool because that means that this should actually be at this CC, that this is being incremented or being set to whatever that value was. Yeah, 4-1, blah, 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 blah. So that's cool. But what we're interested in is changing this from 15 to something lower. So how would we do that? Well, we could do that in a couple ways. One is that I could just single line assembler. I could just change this hard code in memory, and that's fine. That the downside to this though is that the next time that I load the assembly code, or next time that I launch the game, the code gets relaunched into memory, which means that our single line assembler won't change. Our changes won't be persistent. So maybe I want to change this to test things out. But so we can do that. That's fine. So I'll give myself 5. I'll give myself my X factor. I'm going to change this assembly. I'm going to change this from 41700 to actually I'm going to leave it at 41700 for now. I'm going to use the X factor and actually keep track of the time, right? 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, so on and so forth. Just keep track of the time. I can kind of see it, right? Keep track in your head. Okay. This is about 15 seconds. I can see it's quite a while, right? Now what I can do is, oh, well, let me just change this, right? I'll change it to something significantly less. I'll change it to 41000, which brings us down to 8. So now if I set this to 5, it should be a very noticeable difference on how short it is. Yeah, and that is certainly a lot less. So we know that that is the right value. So we're going to set this back though, because this is what it is, and we want to set something that will work every time that we launch the game. So how do we do that? Well, we would right click and actually I don't quite remember how to do this. Maybe assemble? Nope. Tools? Tools looks about right. I think so. Yeah. Tools, auto assemble. Excuse me. So you go to auto assemble, and this is assembly code. You're going to go to template, AOB, array of bytes. This is what's going to be used for. It's going to essentially look for the signature of these bytes to change, right? So you're going to inject your own. Um, on what address do you want the jump? We want it to hop into 316E89, which is right here. This code for uh, inject, that's fine. It is going to put it's scanning for this array of bytes, right? It's going to scan for these opcodes and input your own stuff over top of it. That's essentially what is going on there. Where did it go? Okay, cool. It's right here. So you can see, hey, yeah, this is what is now going to go into memory, right? If you, this is just a template. You can look up more on this if you really care to. Um, but what is cool about this is that it gives you the original code and it's telling you where it's injecting, right? Hey, yeah, blah blah. All these are instructions. They're happening, and this is what the original code is, and this is what we're going to inject there. So that instead of 417000, we're going to replace that with just what we had before, 418. So we're going to maybe assign to current sheet table. That sounds about right. I don't remember all of this part. I haven't done this actually in quite a little bit. So, uh, what will be the new description? Will be modify x factor time. Right. So what this means is that when we trigger this script, it should replace the code with we should be able to toggle the code now. So if I click this, right, now our code is running, so it should maintain a short timer. So if I go to this, I can change our value to 5, blah, blah, and hopefully this game doesn't crash. We'll see. Okay, so we'll wait a little bit here, and we should definitely see that X Factor does not last a very long time. And sure enough, it ended. And now if I untoggle it, the script should not run, and so the original code of the game is running. So that means if I give us X Factor again and activate it, now it should be lasting for the original time, 15 seconds or so. It might be a little bit less than 15, I'm not 100% sure, but it certainly is back to the default length. So that would be how you would change that. So that is an example there of modifying a timer related thing, um, and how to find that. So hopefully that is useful to uh, somebody who does something with their own game. Now, let's say that you wanted to patch the game itself. And what I mean by that is you wanted to fundamentally change the version of the game. Uh, for instance, here we're playing a competitive game, right? And I wanted to make it okay. Let's say that instead of having to open up Cheat Engine and run this specific piece of code every time I launch the game, maybe like I want to balance it a little bit, and I just want this to be natively a part of the thing. What could I do? Well, you can actually modify the binary yourself. And the same way that this is working, you can just do the same thing. So what I would say would be I'm going to now close the game. And what I'm going to end up opening, I'm going to close some of the cheat engine processes that are running. You could use something like Ghidra, I guess, as a reverse engineering tool. I'm just going to use HXD here. It's a hex editor. And I'm just going to open up our Catherine game here. So I'm going to go over to Steam Library, Steam Apps, Common. I'm going to go to where Catherine is. I'm going to open our game. And you'll see there's a whole bunch of stuff. This is the exe kind of like header. This is where, this is more reverse engineering and, oh shoot, what is it called? Like digital forensics kind of side of things. Where if you know that stuff, that's cool, but we're not going too far into that. What we're interested in though is finding these instructions, actually modifying the executable itself. So I know that if I go back, let me move this off of that screen so it's on the bigger side of things. There we go. So I will actually move the cheat engine to the smaller window for now. I'm going to look at the script that we used. So we're looking for, we knew that the original code, the original bytes that were being put in was this C787B400 blah blah this. So what we're going to look for is we're just going to do a control F and look for this actually. I think this should work. I don't know. Now this is where blah blah. These are going to be hex values. We're searching for this, and we're searching in all directions. And sure enough, we see that there is only one location where that happens. Um, so it is looking pretty likely that this is the location of the memory that controls uh, that are the instructions for what we just looked up. And we can also kind of verify this if, hey, instead of just the things that we injected, let's make sure that we're in the rough location because this only found one hit, and this is the same way that their AOB scan module's working, right? It just looks for these sets of bytes, and it just replaces it with your own, which is whatever code you write. So we're just doing this process kind of manually. And, we only found one hit here, but, we could have hit several, not sure. That's why you want to be as kind of precise as possible. And if we were to hit more than one, or you weren't sure, you could also try to look for the adjacent things to kind of know that you're in the right area. So we know that before this should be C787 blah blah. It should be the move 2 to climb 2 height. So we can look and we should see, oh yeah, 0 2, we're going to look for this now. And this should be the bit right before it. And we can actually kind of just see, I see that that is right here. I don't even need to do the control F. So this means that, oh, awesome, we know that this is the right bit, and all we have to do is then we can change this. Now, instead of 4170, the reason why as well things kind of go backwards is that sometimes things just go in reverse, and uh, hex and binaries, that's not super important, unless, for practical purposes. But anyway, yeah, so I'm just going to manually change this value. I set it from 417 to 410, so I'm going to save. Now this kind of works out nice because when you're doing these modifications, the binary expects to be a certain size, right? I mean, that's how all the offsets and all the references are going to work. So if you want to input anything like new, uh, this method won't quite work because this is only going to work for same size replacements. So the idea being that, oh, I'm going to change a constant from one value to another value. But now if I make this change and I have saved it, I'm pretty sure, yep. Now what I should be able to do is I should be able to close Cheat Engine. I can launch Catherine just by itself. And now as a default part of the game, this instruction should have come through. Another thing that we might be interested in is that usually at the starting screen of games you can see version numbers 101151. Oh, that's kind of interesting. What if we want to change that, right? Now we're starting to make modifications to the game, so maybe we want to keep track of our own modifications. So maybe I would do a control F, and now I'm going to look for 101151. And this is not going to be a hex value. It might be an integer, but we're going to just look for a string, right? Oh, and sure enough, we see that there's only one instance where there is something here about a version, right? This looks very relevant, right? This stuff before it, not so much. We do see some text down here. Maybe we could change some of that as well, but maybe we just want to change this. And instead of 1151, we want to change this. Operation changes the file size. Oh, right. So that's another thing, right? We don't want to change the file size at all. So we just want to kind of change these certain values. So maybe instead of 1 1, we want to change this to instead of 3 5, maybe we'll change this to 70. Ah, right. The process is currently open. I'm currently running the game, so I can't quite edit it that way. This was just a proof of concept that, hey, the X factor change was persistent. There's just validation of that. And then next, after we have confirmed that our change has worked, I was getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. After we have confirmed that it has worked, we'll make a change to the version number. That way we can track, our own custom version of the game, which could work for, whatever game you're modifying as well, right? Any custom thing that you have going on. So let's see. Now we don't have Cheat Engine open, so we're not. Now we have to actually farm, so this will be a little bit tricky. Let me see. So you're here. Nope, that's not quite what I wanted. I want juice. Give me juice. Oh, shoot. They made to kill P1. What a shame. It's really unfortunate when things are luck-based and they don't work out how you want them to, right? So, player 1 is going to go up a little bit. Let's increase our odds here. Pool. Pool. There's our juice. And sure enough, if we drink it, this should be pretty noticeable. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There you go. I started the count a little bit off. But yeah, that was the shorter X Factor time is now persistent into the game. So now we have made our changes, so now we want them to be kind of persistent. So where was I? We were over here, blah blah, version 11051. Said we want to change this from that to 70 maybe. So we'll see how this works. Does P1 show up? This is, again, just a proof of concept, just see it. Not sure if it is going to require a number or if I think it just displays the string. So if I launch this now, on the bottom left should be 1011P1 is the version that displays. And that would be great to keep track of these things. Version 1011P1. So now we have our own modified version of Catherine Classic with a shorter X Factor timing that we can do whatever we want with. Um, yeah, so that was changing a constant in a function. If I get around to it, I think the next bit of practical demo would be showing changing a function itself. So maybe, instead of I'm not sure, changing some kind of uh, I'm just trying to think of something that might work. But like maybe when you pillow hit somebody, they die, right? That worked in this game. So changing a fundamental property of the game, or how a mechanic functions. That would be the next. So to kind of recap, we've gone over how to change a certain constant. We've gone so using Cheat Engine. We've gone over how to find the character object using Cheat Engine, make those changes, find pointers. We've gone over how to change the instructions of the game so that it will, certainly with constants, so that, if you have maybe something like, okay, the value of an item is X, maybe now you can change it to, okay, the value of this item is always going to be Y, right? Or whenever you jump twice as high. We've gone over how to change those kinds of things. And then using all that in Cheat Engine, and now we've gone over how to actually change make those changes kind of persistent using a hex editor. This case was HXD, but there are, a number of hex editors, so whatever you're comfortable with. Um, yeah, so I think that about does it for what I think is a fair introduction here.